This video is sponsored by Cool Stuff Inc. with free weekly content and free shipping on orders over $150. You can save 5% site-wide by using the promo code MTGMudsta. I'm also sponsored by Face to Face Games, Canada's premier Magic the Gathering store. Using the promo code MTGMudsta will get you 5% off site-wide, with eligible orders getting free shipping Canada-wide. If you're looking for a direct way to help the channel, please consider joining my Patreon and becoming a member of the generic Goblin Gang. Hey gang, and welcome back. Today's game features some of my lovely friends, with Max playing Cecily and Othelm, aka 11 and Mike. He keeps a Fiend Artisan, Phyrexian Reclamation, Toxic Deluge, Voice of Resurgence, Jetmir's Garden, Indatha Triome, and a Yavimaya Coast. MJ has decided to take Feldon out once more, keeping Detection Tower, 3 Mountains, Chromatic Star, Inferno Titan, and a Spike Shot Elder. I have added some brand new cards to Titania, Protector of Argoth that I want to test out, keeping 3 Snow-Covered Forests, Druid Class, Elvish Reclaimer, Liesa Vital Force, and a Splendid Reclamation. Nick has newly built the Liesa Shroud of Dust deck and is hoping to cause some pain to his opponents, keeping Caves of Koilos, Swamp, Command Tower, Blister Grub, Palace Siege, Soul's Attendant, and oh god, a Bloodchief Ascension. Max wins the die roll and starts us off. He draws, playing a tap Jetmir's Garden. MJ has a Mountain for turn, and casts a Spike Shot Elder. I play a Snow-Covered Forest, casting an Elvish Reclaimer, and passing after that. Nick draws, and plays a Command Tower. He casts a Soul's Attendant, and passes. Max draws, and plays Yavimaya Coast. He then plays Voice of Resurgence, taking 1 from the coast, and passes. MJ plays a Detection Tower, and then casts Feldon. Moving to combat, they swing both creatures at Nick to curse some of that life gain, and Nick takes the hit for both. After that, MJ passes. I've got another Snow-Covered Forest for turn, and leave up the mana to activate my Elvish Reclaimer, passing to Nick after that. Nick draws and plays a Swamp, before tapping it and becoming the enemy of the table with a Bloodchief Ascension. Moving to combat, he swings back at MJ, dealing 1 with the Attendant, and passes. During his end step, I activate the Reclaimer, sacrificing a Snow-Covered Forest to grab a Myriad Landscape, and we move to Max's turn. Max draws and plays a tapped Indatha Triome. He then takes another 1 from the Yavimaya Coast to help cast a Fiend Artisan, and moves to combat. He swings the Voice at Nick, who connects, and he passes. MJ plays a Chromatic Star in their main phase, and for combat, joins in on hitting Nick again, this time for another 3, and passing after that. I draw and play a Snow-Covered Forest. I then pay the 2 to activate the Myriad Landscape, sacrificing it and going to find 2 more forests. I then swing my Reclaimer at Nick, dealing 1, and passing. Nick draws and plays a Caves of Koilos. He then plays a Blister Grub. He then goes to combat, and swings a Soul's Attendant at me for 1. He passes after that. Unfortunately at this point, I only realized in narration that we didn't actually track the Ascension properly, as it should have been 2 or more life, but thankfully, I don't think it changes too much of this game, so please bear with us. Max draws, and plays a Grove of the Burn Willows. He then casts Cecily, which has Nick gaining 1 as he's been doing with the Soul's Attendant every time a creature comes in. Max then goes to combat, once more swinging the Voice at Nick for 2, and passes after that. MJ plays a Mountain for turn. They then swing Feldon at Nick, but Nick decides to trade with the Blister Grub. We then each lose 2 life as it dies, and MJ loses an additional 2 from the Bloodchief Ascension as it sees Feldon go to the graveyard, which has Nick gaining 2. MJ then exiles 2 cards from Feldon taking the damage, both of which are lands that they can't play. They then cast a Wild Magic Sorcerer, passing. I've got a Ramunap Excavator in my main phase, and then play a Force from my graveyard. I then tap enough for a Druid class, and pass to Nick. Nick's got a Vault of Champions as his land for turn, and taps enough for a Monologue Tax, and passes to Max. Max draws and plays an Arid Mesa, cracking it and losing 1 to find a tapped Blood Crypt, but losing an extra 2 from the Bloodchief Ascension while Nick gains 2. Going to combat, he swings all out at Nick, and gets a trigger from Cecily to draw a card and lose a life. Nick takes the full hit, and once that's done, Max plays Othelm, and Nick gains 1 life from it entering. MJ draws and plays a mountain. They then cast Inspiring Statuary, and then a Braid of Fire, and pass to me. I draw and play a Wooded Foothills, gaining 1 life from the Druid class. I then play Titania, which has Nick gaining 1, and then I gain 1 as I bring back my Myriad Landscape thanks to the Druid class. I then pass after that. Nick plays a Swamp, and then pays enough for his commander, Liesa, and passes to Max. Max draws and continues to drop tapped lands with a Savai Triome. He then activates the Fiend Artisan, sacrificing the Voice of Resurgence to go and grab a Viscera Seer. This has Max getting drained for 2 from the Ascension, and Max then follows up by activating Othelm and brings back the Voice, and then passes to MJ. MJ draws and has enough mana for an Inferno Titan, shooting the Soul's Attendant, Viscera Seer, and dealing 1 to Nick's face. Max sacrifices the Viscera Seer in response to scry 1, but still gets drained for 2 from the Bloodchief Ascension. After that, MJ passes. I draw and level up Druid class, and then crack the Wooded Foothills and replay it twice, losing a total of 6 while Nick gains 4. I then play Nissa Vital Force, upticking her to animate a forest and going to combat. I swing the Forest Land Elemental token at Nick, who takes the 5, and I pass my turn after that. Nick draws and plays a Swamp. He then plays Bad Deal, and we each discard 2 and lose 2, while Nick draws 2. Nick also gains 12 from our discards, thanks to the Bloodchief Ascension, but at least he does lose 2 life from Liesa seeing him cast a spell. He then follows up with an Authority of the Consuls, and moves to combat. He swings his commander at Nissa for 5, who connects and gains him 5 life. After that, he passes turn. Max plays a Ketria Triome this turn, and goes to combat. He swings his Elemental and Voice of Resurgence and Cecily at Nick, dealing a total of 10, and Nick just takes the hit. Max then activates the Fiend Artisan in the post-combat main phase, sacrificing the Voice of Resurgence again to go and find a Risen Reef, drawing a card off the trigger as it enters. He then activates Othelm to bring back Voice of Resurgence, triggering the Risen Reef again because it's an elemental. He passes after that. MJ plays a Scroll Rack, losing 2, and then casts Zerzoff and loses 2 more. They then swing everything at Nick, and then pings Nissa for 1, the Risen Reef for 1, and deals 1 to Nick's face with the Inferno Titan on attack trigger. Nick then takes the full hit, and after that, MJ passes, while I re-crack the Myriad Landscape during their end step, and get drained for another 2. I draw, and once more level up Druid class to its final level, making one of my lands into a 10/10. I then go to combat, swinging the land, and 4 elemental tokens at Nick for a whopping 30 damage. Nick takes the full hit, but is still alive at 14. I then play Greater Good, and pass after that. Nick's got an Ancient Tomb for turn, and goes to combat, swinging his commander at MJ, and deals 5 and gains 5. In his post-combat main phase, he plays a Fumigate, and before it resolves, I respond by activating Greater Good and sacrificing the 10/10 land to draw 10 and discard 3, and get drained for 6 by the Bloodchief Ascension. The board rate then resolves, and Nick jumps up to a ridiculous life total between the Fumigate and Bloodchief Ascension triggers. After that, he passes to Max. Max draws and plays an Overgrown Tomb, and then slams a Titan of Industry, which as it enters, destroys the Bloodchief Ascension and gains Max 5 life as well. Moving to combat, he swings the Elemental token that was left behind from the Voice of Resurgence dying at Nick for 2, and passes after that. MJ draws and replays Feldon. With haste being stopped by the Authority of Consuls having creatures coming in tapped, they have to pass after that. I've got a Sylvan Anthem for my turn, and then play a Tireless Tracker, scrying 1. I play my land for turn, which is a Nykthos, and I make a Clue token. I then use Reclamation Sage to destroy the Authority of the Consuls. I then activate Nykthos for 7 green, which I use to recast Titania, bringing back the Wooded Foothills. I gain 2 life total from the Druid class, 1 from the Nykthos that I forgot, and 1 from the Wooded Foothills, and make another Clue token, and pass after that. Nick's main phase has him casting a Palace Siege, and he picks dragons so he'll drain his opponents on his upkeep. He then follows up by casting Liesa again, losing 2 from the commander tax and 2 from the Ancient Tomb to get his commander out. After that, he passes to Max. Max plays Nyeth of the Dire Hunt in his main phase, and goes to combat, swinging at Nick with the Titan of Industry, and paying for Nyeth's trigger, doubling its power, and forcing Nick to block. Nick sadly chumps with his commander, but only loses 4 as he gains back some of the trample damage with lifelink. After that, Max casts a Noble Hierarch and passes to MJ. MJ's got a Bloodsworn Steward and goes to combat, swinging their now 4/4 Feldon at Nick and dealing 4. In their second main phase, they then cast a Darksteel Plate and pass, and during their end step, I crack the Wooded Foothills to find another snow-covered forest, gaining 1 as it comes in, making a 5/3 elemental token, scrying 1 and making a clue token. Not too bad for finding a land. I draw and activate Nykthos once more, and float all of my mana before casting Scapeshift. I sacrifice everything but Nykthos, going to grab 10 lands and getting Dark Depths, Thespian Stage, Inventor's Fair, and some other notable non-basics. This has me making 10 elemental tokens, and scrying once 10 times, and I also make 10 clue tokens. I start cracking some of them with the floating mana, but don't draw into a Concordant Crossroads like I'd been hoping. I then go to combat, swinging 19 points of damage at Nick that I can, and pass after that. Nick drains us with the Palace Siege on his upkeep and draws her turn. He then replays Liesa, taking 4 from the commander tax instead of paying it for mana, and passes. Max draws and casts a Toxic Deluge, putting 5 life into it, which will kill everything except for my Tireless Tracker and the Titan of Industry. He also loses 2 more from Liesa. Moving to combat, he swings his significantly smaller Titan at Nick, who takes the hit, and Max passes. MJ's turn is quite quick as they replay Feldon, and swings him at Nick for 2 more damage, and passes after that. I draw and crack a Crystal Vein for 2 to activate Nykthos, and then use the mana to activate Thespian Stage on Dark Depths to make up Merit Lage. I followed that up by sacrificing Tireless Tracker to Greater Good, drawing 10 and discarding 3, still trying to find that Concordant Crossroads. I then play a Soul Ring, and follow with Nissa who shakes the world. I uptick Nissa to untap Nykthos, and then activate it again to play a different Titania in Titania Nature's Force. I then replay the original Titania, and with her on the stack, I sacrifice my animated Nykthos to Greater Good to draw some cards. I then bring it back thanks to Titania with her Enter the Battlefield trigger. Activating Nykthos again, this time for 11 mana, I then sacrifice the Merit Lage token to draw 20 and discard 3. Finally finding my Concordant Crossroads and casting it. I follow it up with an Eternal Witness, getting back Splendid Reclamation, which I then cast to bring back a bunch of lands. Max responds by casting Court of Calling to see if he has a creature that can stop me, but the best he can do is a Primal Adversary. I get back 13 lands, which are all force thanks to Yavimaya, which makes me 13 elementals thanks to the new Titania. I then announce I'll move to combat, and Nick with a Stone Cold Poker Face is ready with an Anguished Unmaking and targets my Concordant Crossroads. He loses 3, and now with my whole awesome turn brought to an abrupt end, I then move to discard and pass. Nick drains us once more with the Palace Siege and draws. He plays an Archfiend of Depravity, which unfortunately only triggers on our end steps and not his turn, and then a Hedron Archive and passes. Max draws and plays a Luxury Suite. He then plays Yawgmoth and sacrifices the Primal Adversary to draw a card and drops to 1 and shrinks my new Titania. He then plays Yisharn and follows up with a Fauna Shaman, passing and sacking down to 2 creatures because of the Archfiend trigger. MJ draws and makes a deal with Max, swinging their commander at him, and Max double blocks to help MJ dig 11 cards deeper to hopefully find an answer. They find an Earthquake, which they then cast, putting 7 into the X. This wipes my board, but also takes out Max, and after that, MJ passes. I draw, and play Natural Affinity in my main phase to animate all of my lands. Seeing as everyone is tapped out though, I go to combat and swing my piles of lands at MJ and Nick. Nick tracks his Hedron Archive to draw 2 and see if he has an answer, but doesn't, and with that, I take the game. Game review time. So I know I mentioned in the game itself that we made the Bloodchief Ascension triggering earlier than it should have, and we probably should have paid more attention to that. We just come off playing a 3-hour game, which was absolutely mind-melting. That being said, I don't think it changed all that much for this game. I think Nick may have gained about 6 to 8 life more than he should have, but all that meant was that he might have dipped down to 6 at one point, and still been alive, and then been able to regain all that life later on. His Liesa deck was brutal, and there's a second game with it where it just completely taxes everyone's life total every time they cast a spell. I'm all for this because it kind of speeds up the game and makes you have to think a little bit more about what spells you cast, and it's a much easier mechanic to handle than making people discard their cards or not be able to untap their lands. Max's Cecily and Othelm? Mike, we're just going to call him Mike. Deck seemed to be based around elementals, and it's a shame that we didn't get to see it in full potential. I think we saw a little bit of the synergy with Othelm bringing back the voice when Resin Reef was out, but beyond that, it didn't seem to be able to get going, and that might have been partly because of all of his tap lands early on. MJ's Feldon deck unfortunately didn't do a lot of exiling until the very end, when at least it did dig them into an Earthquake, which could have potentially helped them stop me. Speaking of my deck, the new Titania is fantastic in this deck, and even without Splendid Reclamation, being able to play Force from my graveyard and getting the 5/3 elementals either from sacrificing a land or bringing them back from graveyards is insane to work in tandem. I've also got that new spell that makes Forest Dryad tokens, but I never had a really good chance to cast it since none of them would have had haste. This video wouldn't be possible without the help from my sponsors, Cool Stuff Inc., Multizone, Original Magic Art, and Alter Sleeves. But it definitely wouldn't be possible without the help from you, the viewers, and my patrons. So I just want to say thank you for watching, and to remember, friends are just opponents you haven't eliminated yet.